So hopefully everyone that's in here is someone who has something to do with parcel mapping, because that's really what this is about. This is about looking at the differences between ArcMap and ArcGIS Pro and making sure that whatever we go and put together is DOR compliant using this. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the edit guide for parcel level GIS information that the Department of Revenue goes and publishes. And I just pulled the 2019 assessment guide out just so that we could go through and look at what they really require and what they're looking for in this. So in here, they have what they call edit levels. And the first level edit levels, level 1 and level 2, identify attribute fields for review and, if necessary, corrections. These are low priority issues that they identify with the data that is submitted on an annual basis. However, the level 3 and level 4 are higher priority, and they indicate areas that the DOR that the DOR requires be corrected before they'll actually accept and certify your tax roll, unless you go and fill out a hardship form. And I know most property appraisers do not like doing that. So level 4, this is the first edit requirement, and it deals with the shapefile. We are required to go, and all parcel mappers in Florida are required to go and send in 2 different data sets. The first set is just a shapefile containing the tax parcels on here. And so here's the different edit that they require on it. A is the shapefile named correctly. And the naming convention really depends upon whether this is a test submittal or a final submittal. So the first character in here is either a T for a test or F for a final, and then the county name here, and then the month, day, and year here, and then parcels.shp. It must be named that. The second edit level is there an attribute field in there named parcel note? They require that the shape field, or excuse me, the shapefile contain an attribute called parcel note that they then use to go and create all the joins to test all the tax roll information on here. So you have to have a parcel note field. By the way, an interesting thing is that parcel note field is only required in the shapefile, not in any of the other geodatabases. And then edit number 3 is the parcel note field populated with, and this is my symbology on here, the numerical data that links to the numerical data in the data field number 2 on the county's name, address, and legal tax. Now, notice on here, it's interesting that they are referencing the parcel identifier, which is what they really are looking for, as numerical data. It's really not numerical data. It never gets added, subtracted, or anything in there. It is just a unique identifier that contains numbers, and often it contains actually alphanumeric characters on here. So it's not just numerical data, but it is the parcel identifier. They want to make sure that the parcel note field contains a parcel identifier that connects up to the data field number 2 on the county's tax roll submittal, what's commonly called the 12D8 file. And then item number 4, edit 4, is the shapefile projected correctly? I can share with you that because Panda Consulting actually has a contract with the water management districts, and we go and we collect all 67 parcel submittals, both from the county property appraisers and from the DOR. The projection information is a little strange. Sometimes it's correct, sometimes it's not correct, and we often will go and aggregate them together and see whether they overlap or whether there's gaps or anything between them. But it just wants to make sure that it's a projection file and it's a correct projection file for that county. There is no statewide projection that there is commonly accepted. So it's each individual county has their own projection information. And then finally, with the shapefile, are the linear map units of the parcel polygons set to the display feet, US feet. Very simple. The shapefile is usually the thing that has the least problems with it. Often some of the counties have an issue with the naming convention on it, but other than that, it's pretty easy to do. But then we get into the level 3 audit of the geodatabase that's being submitted. And here's the actual things that in the guide, they actually require. You can have other elements in here, but this is what's required. Are subdivisions present? And we can infer from this that what they're looking for is subdivision polygons. They want to make sure there's subdivision polygons present. Are subdivision block polygons present? Are subdivision lots present? Notice they don't refer to any other types of lots other than subdivision lots, lots that appear in subdivisions. And then edit number 4, are subdivision lot dimensions, and this is critical, where known, present. So if you have a subdivision that doesn't have lot dimensions on there, then in fact, it's not known. You don't have to calculate them. They're looking for those known lot dimensions on the subdivisions. And then finally, it says, are dimensions where known present according to Rule 12D81.009 1B subsection 2 of Florida Administrative Code. And this is tax parcels. Do we have dimensions for the tax parcels present? Let's stop here. Notice what they don't have on here is they don't have subdivision dimensions. They don't have what the actual dimensions of the overall subdivision is. They're not looking for that. They want to compare the tax parcels to the lots inside of a subdivision. They also aren't looking for the block dimensions on here, which is a little strange. Anyway, these were written a while ago. They probably should get updated, but there's sort of some inconsistencies or ambiguities in here. And then finally, is acreage where known present? And acreage is always a problem because while we can create an acreage field and we can store the acreage as it's defined on a deed, as soon as you impact that deed with a split or any sort of taking of property, like right-of-way taking or anything, that acreage no longer is a deed acreage. It's something that's then becomes a calculated acreage. So the acreage is a little tough also as far as being compliant with that. And then finally, and this edit number 7 is all property assessed and listed according to sections 192.011 and 193.083 of Florida statutes. So they want to make sure that all property is assessed, and that includes all real property that's owned by private entities, not property owned by public entities. I take that back, that they do want to actually have all property in here other than road rights of way and railroad rights of way shown on here, including the beds of lakes. So all property is supposed to be assessed on here. All right, doesn't say anything about decimals, doesn't say anything about formatting of these fields, doesn't say anything on that, but this is what they're looking for. And that's where there's a great deal of flexibility on here. The other thing is levels. The next level up is level number 2. Now remember, these two, the level 2 and level 1 are sort of, they're not required, but they would like to see them in here. And the level 2 other data layers include public transportation layers, shapefile or polygon file provided if available. Edit 2 is a hydrology or water feature layer or shapefile provided if available. Level 3 is a municipal boundary layer or shapefile provided if available. Number 4 is a taxing district boundary layer or shapefile provided if available. Is a level number 8, level 2 edit 8 is a neighborhood layer or shapefile provided if available. And a neighborhood is different from a subdivision. If you're working in a property appraiser's office, you recognize that a neighborhood really is more of a market area than anything else. Well, they'll compare that for the assessment or the appraisal values on here. Same way as a market area layer or shapefile provided if available. And then edit number 10 is a zoning layer or shapefile provided if available. These are all supplemented layers. And I've gone around to a majority of the counties in the state. I don't know of anybody that has everything in there. But if you have additional layers, and by the way, none of these layers that I'm aware of are maintained by the property appraiser's office. They're all maintained by other departments. Property appraiser's office might do some neighborhood or market areas, but most of the times those aren't even created. So these are just, they would like to see what other layers are out there for their use to help them when they start looking at the actual appraisals on the properties to make sure that they run it through and see if it's all justified. And then finally, level number 1, metadata. Is there metadata present for all data layers provided? Not just tax parcels, but all data layers provided. This is a stickler, and it's looking for FGDC compliant metadata, all right? And it's presented as an XML document, not stored in the geodatabase, but as a separate XML file that's on here that it represents the geospatial metadata, including geographic information files, the geospatial databases, earth imagery, data catalogs, mapping applications, data models, and such. And you can see there's a lot in here. I know I personally don't like metadata, don't like producing it. It's helpful if I get somebody else's data, but this is one of those things where I think the DOR, and they're doing a good job on this, trying to help us all to understand that metadata is important. So let's look at what we really need in the DOR compliant cadastral database for ArcGIS Pro. They say they want subdivision polygons, subdivision block polygons, subdivision lot polygons and dimensions, parcel polygons, dimensions, and acreage included in there. So these are the specs as far as the minimum required DOR components that have to be included in here. As a bit of editorializing, as most people who know me know I will, I wish that they had included also the public land survey system, which is the initial divisions of land. I know that PLSS data, we can do a better job with it, but the public land survey system is the original federal subdivision of land, and everything is based upon that. So it'd be nice if we had some good information available with that, but often we don't. So most of this is fairly easy, and you can see on this slide that what we have here is a very simple database design that includes not just a minimum, but some additional feature classes. For example, with parcel polygons, we want to include not just the polygons, but we also want to include a supplemental feature class called a line feature class, on which we can go and memorialize any POGO information that was used, or at least memorialize the lines that were used to create those polygons. So we have some way of looking back at how did we come up with this polygon that represents that overall taxable area on here. So one of the first suggestions is make sure that each of these polygon feature classes contain a corresponding line feature class. Now, I know that a lot of people go and have what we often refer to as a cartographic data model, where you'll have a bunch of polygons and then only one line feature class, and then you'll code those to create a map document or a map in which you'll code the section lines and the subdivision lines and the lot lines so that they're not corresponding. But if you note, there actually is a difference between them, and the dimensions that appear on a section boundary are not the same as would appear on a block boundary or on a lot boundary. So it's a good practice to go and have separate lines for each of them, because that way you can go and maintain those lines in and of themselves, and who created them, when were they created, those sorts of things on there. Not just creating this information so that it can create a map, but rather begin to go and change the way we think of this data. That it is not for producing a map, it's for creating a library, a digital library of information about the land that we're assessing. All right, so overall, my suggestion is that for every single layer type that we have a polygon and a line feature class. Not talking about whether or not this is in the parcel fabric or whether this is just in a geodatabase, but it's a good practice to have separate line feature classes for each of these polygon types on here. So on the polygon feature class, let's think about that for a little bit. There really is only one required attribute field, with the exception of the tax parcel, is that the only required attribute is the identifier field. That when you export it out, it becomes the parcel no field for that shapefile that you export out. But other than that, we really only need one on here. And then for parcels, you also need a separate acreage field in there. But often you'll find something like this happening, where you'll have a PCN field. This is the property control number field. Then you have a different formatting one for the Department of Revenue parcel control number, and then an additional one called parcel no that's used for the shapefile. And then you'll have an SPCN file or field called for the short property control number on here. So when I go around the state and look at the different structures that we have out there, we'll often see these variations in here. I know there's actually a couple counties that use multiple numbers. One is a record number inside of the CAMA system, another one is the parcel control number on here. So it depends upon individual county as far as how you're actually looking for it. And then the other thing that some counties will do is they will go and have multiple acreage fields. They'll have a map acreage or a deed acreage stored, and that's the one that gets sent to the Department of Revenue. And then they'll have a GIS acres or a calculated acreage field that's what's actually mapped on there. And that's actually not a bad idea, because that allows you to then do a comparison of what was the deeded acreage that was shown on the document itself, that deed of conveyance, versus what it was actually mapped as. And you can use that as an indicator of the quality of the mapping that's being done, and whether there's an issue that has to be identified and investigated, or whether it's a good enough parcel mapping on here. We also see, and in this case, this county has STR field, and STR is usually a section, township, and range. So they want some identifier for where this parcel is located. That's, not a bad idea. However, with some of the newer technology, you don't need to go and store it on the individual parcels. You can go and simultaneously, or you can immediately go and calculate that. Often that STR number is also embedded inside of the property control number. Then you see things like billing code being how it's billed out, is it billed out, that sort of thing. You'll see reasoning, why it's reasoned a certain way, and then sort of all the editing fields in here. You know, when was the last time it was edited, when it was created, that sort of thing. One of the things I know that a lot of counties will do is they will look at a confidentiality code, and they'll either store the confidentiality code in the GIS data or in the CAMA data, but it depends upon whether they show the parcel polygon if it is marked confidential or not. Not a whole lot of things that we can add here. As long as you have an identifier and as long as you have at least one attribute field for the acreage, which is a required from the DOR, I think you're fine. I think you're fine. The others are all for internal use. I can recommend you take a look at this every once in a while. And just because you've been doing it like this, should you continue doing it like this? This is you want to use that switch from ArcMap into ArcGIS Pro as an opportunity to go and look at the efficiency of what you've been doing and see whether or not you need to continue doing that. Here's where the problem comes in, is in the line feature classes. Because within ArcGIS Pro, they've had ESRI has transitioned the standard coordinate geometry fields, the standard COGO fields, so that the COGO fields are no longer string fields, text fields. They are actually now number fields. These numeric fields are used and can be used for calculations. Within the parcel fabric, they automatically get used for calculations, but within just standard ArcGIS Pro, you can also use those for other elements on here, calculations, those sorts of things, and compare what the distance is that's stored from COGO versus what the actual shape length is. And you can use this to begin analyzing the quality of the mapping. Does it say 100 feet on the distance field, but in fact, that line is actually 300 feet long? You've got a problem there. You want to make sure that as much as possible, the distance field that's stored reflects within tolerances what the actual line is mapped out. You don't want to continue to create tax maps that are just make believe as far as what these dimensions really are. You want to begin analyzing your data and making it as close as possible to what is shown on those maps. The other thing we want to look at is for example, the direction field, which is commonly referred to as the bearing field. It's now a number field, and you can tell it how to reflect that back, whether you want 2 decimal places, 3 decimal places in the seconds, whether you want quadrant bearings, how you want it to be displayed on here. And this is critical. This transition is the one that's most troublesome for the submittal for the Department of Revenue, because when the DOR gets this data and you store all your COGO in these number fields, they don't know what the formatting is. So what they see is they see 6 decimal places behind it. And we've had several counties that have transitioned into ArcGIS Pro, and they get pinged for that and say, oh, these numbers are unrealistic because they have 6 decimal places in them. So we have to find some way to go and reflect and to help guide the Department of Revenue to understand what's a real value that's you've stored, or maybe one that's been inversed, and they can differentiate between what really is the information you've input versus what might have been calculated before. So we go and we do some other things in here. One, let's look here at dimensioning, because this is it. When we dimension the lots, when we dimension the tax parcels in here, We want to make sure that the submittal includes information that is stored that's reflective of what's shown on the subdivision plats for the lots and what's shown in the actual record documents for our tax parcels on here. And we've got problems with this because there's several options here. One, we can use ArcMap annotation, which a lot of us have, is that we have ArcMap annotation on here. We could also use ArcGIS Pro annotation, or we could use ArcGIS Pro COGO labeling of those COGO attribute fields, which are now numeric labels. Or we can use ArcGIS Pro and we can create some solution that takes the numbers and stores them out there as text fields and gives the Department of Revenue some comfort that, yes, we've gone through this and this is reflective of it, and they can use that to go and analyze and approve it. But there's problems. ArcMap annotation is not editable inside of ArcGIS Pro. And the reason for this is that within ArcGIS Pro, Esri has added 2 new attribute fields to the annotation feature class. So making the transition from ArcMap into ArcGIS Pro requires that we look at are we going to continue to use annotation? And then what version of that annotation are we using? And how are we going to make that transition? Upgrading it from ArcMap annotation into ArcGIS Pro is one simple tool. It's called an upgrade data set, and it goes and takes your existing annotation and adds those 2 attribute fields to it. But what that does is it says, once you do that, you can never read that annotation in ArcMap again because it doesn't know what those 2 attribute fields are. So once you upgrade it one time, you can't use it by ArcMap again. Solution, maybe what we do is we duplicate it and copy it. Well, then we can have one set which is editable in ArcMap and one set which is editable in ArcGIS Pro. The problem is when we create dimensions in Pro, we can't send them backwards. We can't go and in Pro write backwards to ArcMap. There is no backwards compatibility on here. So there is no way for us to go and do that. So ArcGIS Pro Anno is not readable by ArcMap. So we're sort of at this point where we have to decide how we're going to handle this if we're moving into Pro. Another issue is that the ArcGIS Pro COGO numeric values that are stored, they get rejected because you have too many decimal points on them in the raw data. There is no way to go and do it. Therefore, a good solution is to go and take ArcGIS Pro COGO and build a text label field for it. All right. So what I've done here is I've gone and I've added and created a corresponding text direction field, text distance field, text delta field, text radius field, and a COGO tangent field on here, and a text arc length field, so that these are text fields that we can actually store values in. And when we deliver that to the Department of Revenue, they can read it and say, oh, that's what these are. And we should not copy every single value over there because they'll have the same issue in that. Well, what is the good value? What is the one that's been entered? What's the one that appears on the deed versus one that's just been calculated on here? So what we've done is said, well, let's go and put in place an attribute field called COGO type, so that if we have a COGO type field, we can mark it. Is this something that appears on the deed? Or is this something that's been inversed? Or is this something that was calculated? Because we have an issue here in that, and I mentioned this earlier, when we have a dimension, that dimension is only valid for that one transaction, that one parcel, if it's in the same state it was created in when it was originally deeded out. But most of us know that doesn't, I mean, that happens sometimes, but often you'll have transactions that will affect existing parcels. So you'll be splitting existing parcels, or you do what's called a boundary line adjustment, where one landowner goes and deeds a little bit of their land over to the adjoining owner to take care of some sort of encumbrance on top of the land, you know, and encroachment. They'll go and they'll deed it. So they sort of manipulate the boundary lines there. And as soon as you do that, those original dimensions are no longer applicable. So you have to have a way to go and define what was the original deed, what's been manipulated because of these splits or combines, or these different functions that occur, because tax parcel data is a very dynamic data set, versus what's been inversed, and really you shouldn't even pay attention to this. This is just sort of calculating what those shape lengths are, and that's about it. And we've done this by creating this COGO type attribute field and storing a domain on it. And you can see that it has these three values of deed. This is what appears on the deed or the plat. Inversed, meaning it basically reflects the bearing and distance information from the line itself. And the calculation, which is one that this has been impacted by some sort of transaction that occurred after the original deed dimension was created. So this is one of the solutions on how to do this. And I can tell you, this solution is automatically built in to the parcel fabric. But if you don't convert to the parcel fabric, you can still implement this solution with simple ArcGIS Pro on here. And then finally, what you want to do is, with this, you want to go and add some attribute rules. And an attribute rule, if you watched my presentation yesterday, it can be set up so that as you make a change in this COGO type, if you go and take a dimension and say this was entered from the deed, it will take the COGO value and copy it over into the text COGO attribute field, round it to 2 decimal places, and put a foot marker on it, you know, make it look as if it is exactly as the piece of ANA would appear. And in doing it that way, the submittal to the Department of Revenue will contain the text that's automatically coded, and the DOR can have a much easier way of evaluating it and saying, yes, you've got the information you need. We're not going to have any problems on here. So that literally when you build a subdivision and you build all those lots in there, you should be calculating them all as whatever the subdivision plat says, and they should then be all marked as being the deeded or the platted information on here. All right, and be able to go and put it in there. That way, the Department of Revenue will know what lines contain the deeded dimensions and be able to accept them, and the approval process will be much easier for you and for the Department of Revenue. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to get some consistency and have it so that the actual review and approval process is much easier all the way around. So I don't see any questions in here. Vanda, do you know?
There is one question from Tony Cooper. He asked, how big is DOR's GIS department?
It's my understanding there may only be 2 or 3 people there right now, and they have an unbelievable job. So they have to go and analyze the submittals for both the test submittals and the final submittals to make sure that it contains all the land in the county, that all those edit levels that we had talked about before, they have to go through every single year. They've got to go through the test and the final submittals and make sure that that the data is in compliance with that the numbers join up to the tax rolls. They've got a really difficult job. That's the reason why one of the reasons why I'm making this presentation is if we help them with this, it'll help us in the long run, because if we can make it easier for them. Right now, they have so many different types of submittals for the dimensions that I know it would drive me crazy, and I think it drives Tom and Charles and the other people up there crazy too. They've got a lot that has to go on here. All right. So yeah, it's a very small department. Unfortunately, at one time they had much more people in there, many more people in there, and it was easier for them to go and handle this. But those days are long gone. We now have a smaller group and smaller department. So it's the reason why I'm suggesting it's not necessarily an overreach for us to go and help them to do their job by submitting it in a way that's easier for them to analyze. Any other comments? No. With that, I think I'm going to close it out. Again, here's my contact information. If you go up to our website, by the way, you will see that we also have a YouTube channel and we have videos. We right now have somewhere close to 60 hours of videos up there, everything from parcel fabrics to making a transition into ArcGIS Pro, to putting together story maps or attribute rules or anything you want to know about the Esri technologies. We probably have a video up there that deals with it. If we don't, send me an email and we'll make one for it. We do several workshops a month, and we try to go and help people understand how to go and use that technology. All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Frank. Yeah, I have to read this one from Ned Cake. He said, on behalf of the Shrug Committee, thank you, Frank. We really appreciate you sponsoring your sponsorship and participation in the workshop. So thank you. And I think, wait, there's another question. Oh no, just thank you, Frank, from Michael Atchison.